In 1340, you can buy a crossing of Asia at a published rate. 25,000 gold florins of cargo, 60 to 80 sami of silver, tana to Cathay. A clerk in Florence writes the stage times to the day. 25 to Gitarkin, 70 to Kamekshu, and he has never gone. He does not need to. Merchants have used the road and come back, and on their word he writes that it is safe by day and by night. Then, in the same paragraph, he sets out who takes your goods if you die on it. He does not say why that clause is there. You are the merchant he is writing for. Silver, a dragoman, 2 servants, and a year to spend. The road starts at a customs post at the mouth of the Don and ends at the capital of the largest empire on earth. A bank clerk in Tuscany can quote you the price of it, the way a freight agent quotes a container today. Nothing in this document is exploration. Nobody is being brave. It is a timetable with a rate card attached. This road has 135 years left. June 1475. An Ottoman army and fleet under Gedik Ahmed Pasha come round the Crimean coast and stand off Caffa, the Genoese city on the water. About 70,000 people are inside it. It surrenders after several days. The Genoese are expelled from Caffa and from every other colony they hold on that sea. No relief fleet sails from Genoa. Not a late one. Not a small one. None. If you are the merchant that manual was written for, this is the year your route loses its last European port. And the odd thing is not the siege. Sieges are ordinary. The odd thing is the silence behind it. Ask what killed the Silk Road, and you will get the same answer from nearly everybody. And it is not a stupid answer. In 1453, Mehmed II took Constantinople. Within 22 years, the Ottomans held the northern shore of the Black Sea, and the Genoese were out of it entirely. The charge writes itself. An empire sits down across the middle of the map, closes the door, and Europe is forced onto the ocean to get around it. Suspect, motive, dates that line up, and it is the version taught in most schools in the world, including probably yours. So put the Ottomans in the chair first, and let the case be made properly. It survives about 4 minutes of contact with the customs figures. Start with what the Ottomans actually controlled, because the charge assumes they controlled the price of Eastern goods, and they did not in 1453, and not for a long time before it. The chokehold on spices coming into Europe was already built, and it was built in Cairo. In 1426, the Mamluk Sultan Barzbay made pepper a state monopoly. 2 years later, he extended it to every spice. The Karimi merchants who had run that trade for generations were ordered to sell their cargoes to the Sultan's agents, at prices the Sultan set, and the customs take on monopolized goods doubled. That is a state seizing the pricing of the entire Eastern trade. 25 years before an Ottoman soldier stood on the Bosporus. Read the edict as a merchant would. A sultan does not need to write down that you must sell to his agents unless you were previously selling to somebody else at a better price and doing well out of it. The prohibition is a map of where the money was, and the money was in the Red Sea and the Levant. Indian pepper coming up to Jeddah, across to Cairo, down to Alexandria, onto a Venetian galley. Not one leg of that route touches the overland road you have been picturing. So when people say the Turks put a toll on the spice road, the honest reply is that somebody already had. He was in Egypt, and he was doing it to a completely different road. Now the part that surprises almost everyone. If the Ottomans strangled the Eastern trade, the volumes should collapse and stay collapsed. They do not. The Ottomans took Egypt in 1517, and Alexandria with it. So Alexandria is now an Ottoman port, under Ottoman customs, with Ottoman officers on the quay. Venetian pepper leaving it averaged 1,310,454 pounds a year between 1560 and 1564. That is a record. Not a survival, not a trickle. A record, more than a century after the empire supposedly shut the road. You do not tax at record weight a trade you are trying to kill. You tax at record weight a trade you want to keep. Every empire that ever sat on a trade route worked this out inside a generation, because a closed road pays a sultan nothing and an open road pays him on every bale. So the Ottomans go down for one count and one only. They took Caffa in June 1475 and the Genoese never came back. That is theft with a date on it, and it is real. But taking the last building at the end of a road is not the same crime as killing the road, and the ledger will not let the two be confused. If you have ever wondered why the obvious answer to a famous question is usually the last one anybody checks, subscribe. Because the second obvious answer is about to fail as well. The second name is Vasco da Gama, and the case against him has better numbers than the Ottoman case ever had. Here is the damage. At the close of the 15th century, Venice was landing something near 1,600 tons of spice a year. About 15 years later, that figure was under 500 tons. Two-thirds of the business, gone inside a decade and a half. Across the 16th century, Portugal was landing more than 2,000 tons of pepper a year by the Cape. Those are real figures, and they point in one direction. The ocean took the trade off the land. Then look at the ships doing it. The largest carracks in da Gama's fleet came in at around 120 tons. That is the whole fleet's flagship. 120 tons of hull going round Africa into an ocean nobody in Lisbon had charted and coming back with whatever survived. 120 tons is what is supposed to have ended a continental trading system. The 500 to 600 ton carrack, the ship that could actually move a continent's pepper, is a later vessel. It has to be. You do not build the big hull first and then go looking for a route. You find the route with something small enough to risk, and the tonnage follows the profit. The ships capable of doing the damage arrive after the damage is already in the books. And then look at the calendar, which is where the case dies. Da Gama reached Calicut in May 1498. Caffa surrendered in June 1475. That is 23 years. The last European port on the overland road was gone 23 years before a Portuguese hull touched India. You cannot lose a customer to a competitor who has not opened yet. Notice, too, what the charge sheet against the sea route is actually made of. Venice, Lisbon, Alexandria, the Indian Ocean, hulls and tonnages and pepper prices. Not one figure in it comes from Tana. Not one comes from Sarai or Organcy or Otrar. Every number in the case against Da Gama is a number about one sea trade taking business off another. The Red Sea and the Levant. The route through Cairo that Barsbay had already put a lock on. The overland road is not in the argument at all. It has already left the room. There were two eastern routes into Europe, and they were never in the same business. One came by sea and river through the Red Sea and Egypt carrying bulk spice. The one Venice fought over, the one Barsbay taxed, the one the Portuguese eventually broke. The other was a long overland haul across the steppe, carrying silk and high-value goods to Genoese warehouses on the Black Sea. Da Gama's ships were aimed squarely at the first. They were never within 4,000 miles of the second, which brings you to the suspect with the best motive of the three. The plague did not merely arrive on this road. It came out of it. Mongol forces under Janibeg sat outside Caffa from 1345 to 1347. Plague broke out in the besieging camp. A notary in Piacenza, writing in 1348, says the bodies were thrown over the walls into the city and that the Genoese who fled by ship carried it home with them. Historians argue hard about that last part, and you should know that the corpses over the wall are in the source. The claim that Caffa infected Europe is disputed, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. What is not disputed is the arithmetic afterwards. Within 6 years, the Black Death had killed somewhere between a quarter and a third of everyone in Europe. That is your customer base. If you are selling silk, pepper, alum, and furs into the cities of Italy and Flanders, 1 in 3 of the people who bought them is dead. This is the suspect with the motive, the opportunity, and the physical presence at the scene. Here is where it fails. Caffa did not die. It was a city of 6,000 houses inside the walls and 11,000 outside them, and when the Ottoman fleet arrived, it still counted about 70,000 people. That is 128 years after the plague passed through it. 128 years of Genoese notaries, Genoese customs officers, Genoese ships loading on the same quay. A road does not survive its own killer by a century and a quarter. And there is a second problem, which is who your customers were. A caravan crossing the steppe is not carrying bread. It is carrying silk, dyestuff, spice, and worked metal to the households that could afford them, a thin layer at the top of European society. Whether that layer's buying shrank by a third, or by nothing, or by more, is not something the surviving accounts will tell you, and any figure you are offered for it has been reconstructed rather than read. Something can wound a business badly and still not be the thing that closed it. The Black Death is the cleanest example in this whole case. Enormous damage, no fatality. So the 3 names everyone reaches for have now given you an empire that taxed the trade at record weight, a fleet that arrived 23 years late, and a plague the victim outlived by 5 generations. Go back to the manual, and this time read what the money was actually for. 60 to 80 sami of silver on 25,000 florins of cargo. Do that arithmetic in the units the clerk himself gives you, and it stops looking like a travel budget. A samo is 5 gold florins. 60 to 80 sami is 300 to 400 florins. Against 25,000 florins of goods, that is between 1 and 2/10 and 1/6% of what you are carrying. I am not going to translate any of that into modern money, because there is no honest exchange rate across 700 years, and anyone who gives you one is selling something. Compare it inside its own world instead. 1 samo of silver buys you 19 or 20 pounds of Chinese silk, so the entire crossing of Asia, every wagon, every guard, every knight's fodder, costs about what 1,140 to 1,600 pounds of that silk is worth. You are shipping a fortune across the largest landmass on Earth for the price of a few bales of the thing you went to buy. Now put the time next to it. 25 days to Gitarchin, 1 by river to Sarai, 8 more to Sarakonko, 20 in a camel wagon to Organsi, 35 to 40 to Otrar, 45 on pack asses to Armalek, 70 on asses to Kameksu, 45 on horseback to the river, 30 from Kasai to the capital. Add the named stages and you are at 279 days on the road, one way, and the clerk leaves some of the river passages uncounted, so it is worse than that. 279 days. Coming home, he reckons about 5 sami per head of pack animal. An ox wagon holds 10 cantars, a camel wagon 30, and when you finally reach Cathay, the Lord's officers take your silver off you and hand back paper called balishi, which every merchant is compelled to accept. 9 months out, 9 months back, your money confiscated and replaced with paper at the far end, and the transport bill is under 2%. That number is not a freight rate. It cannot be. Nothing about that journey is cheap. Not the animals, not the fodder, not the men, not the 18 months of your life. A caravan road does not sell speed. What it sells is the promise that the cargo arrives with the man who owns it, and in 1340 that promise was being given away almost free because somebody else was paying for it. Read the clause. If the merchant dies on the road, everything he is carrying belongs to the lord of the country where he died, unless a brother or a close associate is standing there to claim it. That is not a warning about bandits. That is a rule about jurisdiction, and rules about jurisdiction only exist where there is a jurisdiction. And read the exception, the one he buries in the safety notice. The road is safe, he writes, except when a lord dies and before the new lord is proclaimed. In that gap, he says, the Franks have suffered. There it is. The whole business in one subordinate clause. 1 to 2% was the price of a signature. Not a route, not a distance, not a mule. A signature from a man who was alive, on a stretch of ground he could hold. And the road needed 4 of them, laid end to end across Asia, all valid on the same morning. Signatures expire. Here is the order they went in, and everyone has a date, November 1335. Abu Sa'd, the last Ilkhan, dies with no heir and no named successor. The Persian half of the network, the stretch that carried the southern traffic, comes apart into rival factions inside a year. Note the date, then note the manual. The Florentine was still writing that the road was safe about 4 years after the man who guaranteed a quarter of it was already dead. The rate card was out of date before the ink was dry, and nobody in Florence knew. 1368. The Mongol dynasty in China falls, and the Ming take its place. 3 years later, the Ming forbid coastal subjects to sail overseas. By 1390, an edict declares trade with outer barbarians strictly prohibited. Read the prohibition, and you learn what was profitable. You do not ban something nobody is doing. The far terminus does not vanish, it closes its counter. And the paper money at the end of the itinerary is now issued by a state that would rather you were not there. Then the western end goes, and it does not go slowly. July 1395. Timur brings artillery to Tana at the mouth of the Don, batters the walls down, massacres and enslaves the people in it, and burns the churches and the warehouses. The same campaign destroys Sarai and sacks Astrakhan. Look at what that is on the page. Tana is stage 1 of the itinerary. Sarai is stage 2. Sarakonko on the same river system is stage 3. In one summer, a man who was not even interested in the road removed the first 3 lines of the timetable and the 2 cities that fed them. And here is the thing about a road that runs on guarantees rather than on gravel. Gravel can be repaired. You can rebuild a warehouse in a season, and the Genoese did rebuild at Tana afterwards and traded there again. What cannot be rebuilt is the arrangement underneath it. One authority, sitting on the whole length, with more to gain from your bale arriving than from taking it off you. That is not infrastructure. It is a policy, held by a person, and when the person goes, it does not decay. It stops. Think about what the merchant now has to do instead. Every frontier is a negotiation with somebody whose father did not sign anything. Every warlord between Otrar and the Volga has to be paid separately, and none of them can promise you the next man's behavior. The death clause that used to mean a jurisdiction would hold your goods for your brother now means nothing at all because there is no jurisdiction, only whoever is standing there. This road did not get longer. It got expensive in a way that no account book of the period ever recorded because the cost had stopped being a number and gone back to being a risk, and you cannot put a risk on a rate card. That is precisely why no second rate card was ever written. There is a date for the decision, and it is 22 years before the siege. In 1453, the year Constantinople fell, the Republic of Genoa handed sovereignty over Caffa and its other Black Sea colonies to the Banco di San Giorgio, not a new governor, not a garrison, a bank. From that year, the western end of the road was held on a bank's books and administered to a bank's account, and it stayed that way until the Genoese were expelled from it. 22 years, run as a position rather than as a possession. That is the answer to the silence in 1475. A republic can be shamed into a relief fleet. It has citizens in the city, families with seats in the Great Council, a name to lose in every port on the Mediterranean. It has a standing fear that the next colony abandoned will be the one its own creditors are watching. A financial institution holding a distant colony has none of that. It has a position. A position can be marked down to nothing without a single ship leaving harbor, and marking it down is cheaper than defending it in every scenario anyone in that building could model. So when the fleet appeared off Caffa, there was no state whose honor was on the quay. There was a creditor, several weeks away by sea, doing sums. And the sums were not close. Notice that nobody in this story does anything wrong. There is no coward, no traitor, no fatal misjudgment in a council chamber. Genoa transferred an obligation it could no longer carry to the only institution in the city with the money to carry it, which is a reasonable thing to do. The bank administered what it had been given, which is what banks do. Nobody refused to send help. Nobody had to. The obligation had been quietly converted into an accounting question 22 years earlier, and accounting questions do not sail. In 1602, the last European known to make that crossing overland set out from Agra. His name was Bento de Goy. He was a Jesuit lay brother, and he traveled as a Persian-speaking Armenian merchant because that was the only identity the road would still accept. He died at Suzhou on the 11th of April, 1607. Waiting on the wrong side of a frontier for a permission that never came. He had established one thing, that the Cathay of the old books and the China the Portuguese were already trading with by sea were the same country. Europe had lost track of a place it used to have stage times for. In 1340, nobody needed that established. A clerk in Florence who had never left Italy could write down 25 days to Gitarchan and 70 days to Kameksu and expect a stranger to plan a year of his life around it. 260 years later, a man had to spend 5 years, and then his life proving the place was there at all. The stage times are still correct, by the way. Tana to the Chinese capital has not moved a single day's ride further away. The mountains are where they were. The rivers are where they were. Nothing physical about that road ever changed. What changed was that a merchant could once get a number for it. 60 to 80 sami, quotable, in writing, from a man in Tuscany who had never gone. No second manual of that kind survives for this road. That is what died. Not the distance, the price. And the price was never really about camels. Read the clause one more time, the one he buried in the safety notice, and it tells you exactly what you were buying. A list of men who had to stay alive.